Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about all to do with anabolics really. Blood work, pre-prep and anabolics that we'll be using on prep or PEDs in general. I don't know what it's, I've got a problem with that. Is it, what is that? Is that an antonym? No, it's just abbreviation. I don't like it. I don't like PEDs. It gives me horrible vibes, but whatever. That's what we're going to talk about today, because we're not talking about it yet on the channel. I don't think I've gone through any blood work. Now, there's some things to sort of set out initially with regards to blood work. I've always had, unfortunately, like low HDL. It's just never got better. At the moment, it's in the best spot it's ever been, which is great. But to this point, it's not been good. Well, when I do bloods, it never seems to be too good. And then obviously there's things to consider with regards to training. You will notice that some blood markers are kind of always going to be out. So the ideal way to take a blood test is fasted, first thing in the morning. You want venous, by the way, not finger prick. Hydrated, so fasted from food, but hydrated. And ideally, like no alcohol, obviously, the night before. Probably not like a high fat meal the night before either, because that can skew some things. And then also you're supposed to not train for like 2-3 days in the lead up, because training itself, regardless of anabolics, will impact a number of your blood markers, which I'll go through in a minute. And some of these will look quite out of range, and I will explain why I'm not too worried about them, because they always are, because of training, muscle breakdown, etc. So red blood cells initially, all good really. RDW is very, very slightly above the range, I mean by 0.3, so I'm not really worried about that. Hemoglobin's all good, hematocrit's all good, red cell count is all good, so that's fine. White blood cells, as normal, are fine. They normally only really flag up when you've had like a recent infection or an illness, or your body's battling with something, which obviously it's not. My platelet count is slightly above the range. That is usually just down to like recent inflammation or like an infection, so nothing to worry about there. Kidney health, urea, creatinine, and EGFR. So EGFR is your glomerular filtration rate, and that really is the one that's important. That's the one that says, are your kidneys filtrating like they need to? Mine is in range, it's above the range it needs to be at, which is great. Urea and creatinine we're typically gonna see elevated anyway, like I said, because of training, because of muscle breakdown. So they are not numbers that I'm concerned about. If I did not train for a few days prior to a test, we'd probably see a slightly different result, but for now, it's not something I'm worried about. Liver health, so ALP and ALT, again, are two markers that are typically impacted by training. And one that if you wanted to get a real clear picture of, you should again not train prior to your test. They are both, ALP is in range, ALT is just out of the range, so it's 5 units above the range. The most important one here for me is GGT, and that is because that one is not typically impacted by training. So providing GGT is in range, you're normally good. And for me, my liver's actually always been pretty good. The beauty of the liver is that it's like self-regenerating, like it will sort itself out, which is quite cool. And also TUDCA and NAC and TUDCA are really quite potent in terms of like helping you sort your kidney out if you need to. The liver will only really be nailed by like hepatotoxic drugs, which obviously I'm only using injectables at the moment, so not likely to be damaged by what I'm using. HbA1c is within range as well, which is great. That is just kind of a marker to look at how insulin sensitive, how glucose sensitive you are at the moment, if you're responsive to that food and that influx of calories, which is fine. That's in range. And then the big one for me is cholesterol. This is the one that's always it's always problematic for me, which obviously is a long-term concern. It's not something I'm going to feel the sort of risks of now or the dangers of now, but later on in life I may well be shaving some time off. My total cholesterol is in range, my LDL is in range, my non-HDL is in range, but as I mentioned at the start, my HDL is just below the range. And that is despite taking red yeast rice, that is despite taking citrus bergamot and also omega-3s. So even with all that, I'm not managing to get my HDL in the range. The interesting thing about HDL is studies have shown that even with you're bringing your HDL up, you don't necessarily see like a lower risk of atherosclerosis. So it's a bit like, does it matter too much? I don't want to say it doesn't matter, like it's better to have that cardioprotective lipoprotein, but for me it's less of a concern. Like my total cholesterol is in range, and it's just because the HDL rating is slightly lower that my ratio of total cholesterol to HDL is slightly out of whack. So that's why I've got 2 red markers there. There are a couple of other things that I am going to implement, or one other thing that I'm going to implement as I go into this prep, which is aged garlic. So there's been quite a lot of studies that show that garlic is really good for, not just garlic, but like the aged garlic supplement. It's odorless, by the way. It's good for bringing your HDL up. So even for me, like, whether it's a big concern or not, like, it would be cool to see it in range. Like, I'd like to improve it, and therefore I will be implementing that alongside citrus bergamot, alongside red yeast rice and omega-3s. I think omega-3s everyone should be taking. Again, creatine kinase is looking way out of range. That will literally be because of the training. So my thyroid is fine, which is good. It was a little bit on the low end, so they're all within range, but they're just a little bit lower, which me and Cal sort of spoke about in terms of planning that cycle ahead and whether that thyroid axis is going to need support earlier than we'd normally like. So the likes of T3, T4 have already come into the stack, which I'll talk through in a minute. And then obviously hormones, FSH, LH are below the range because I was using exogenous testosterone on the cruise. And then my testosterone itself was at 21. So fair to say that's a pretty perfect cruise, like mid to high within the range. That's a nice number. And that is that. So that is my blood work. So that was kind of the blood work review that I sent over to Cal. As I said, initially, like, you can see a lot of red markers and be like, oh my God, but with the context behind them, a lot of them muscle breakdown, just the fact that we're training, carrying high muscle mass, all this stuff can impact a lot of those numbers. So in terms of going forward, my stack for prep, the stack that has begun, totally I'm going to be using 450 milligrams of testosterone propionate, 750 milligrams of masteron propionate, and 100 milligrams of tren acetate. They are all fast-acting esters, which means the half-life is lower than, or slower than, quicker than slower-acting esters. What that means is they will kind of filter through your body quicker, so you'll get the effects quicker and you'll lose them quicker if you cease jabbing. Obviously, I'm going to be using them 5 times a week, so Monday to Friday is my jab days, just to keep it consistent, and that means there will be a relatively consistent dose of those steroids in my system throughout the week and obviously throughout the prep. It's not a mild cycle, but it's nowhere near what I've seen elsewhere. Obviously, the most alarming number is like that high masteron number, but masteron is probably one of the least damaging steroids out there, so not too concerning there. It probably will ramp up a little bit as prep goes on. And in fact, even since starting this, we've actually switched over to Primo. Primo is kind of even less damaging than most steroids. Probably one of the safer ones to use. And we'll use that in the beginning part of prep, and then probably swap back to Masteron later on. Masteron's like a very cosmetic drug, so kind of that hard, dry look. And it's quite a useful drug to be using within prep. And then in terms of other sort of ancillary drugs, Benbuterol, I won't say the dose of that, but we started at a pretty standard dose and we've worked up once. T3 and T4 are both in to support that thyroid axis that we mentioned. And telmisartan, which despite being like a health drug, if you like, something that's going to protect you, has some performance enhancing benefits. And the final one, growth hormone. So growth hormone is in at 2 IUs in the morning and 2 IUs in the afternoon. I take my growth hormone in the afternoon as opposed to at night because we typically have like a nice release of growth hormone when we're sleeping anyway. So it kind of makes sense to stagger it morning, middle, like kind of afternoon, and then evening. So that is my stack as it stands. That is what we've started prep on, and that is where we will I guess hope to see the most amount of fat loss and progress. How am I feeling? I kind of spoke about it in the day in the life. I'm definitely starting to feel it now. You've probably heard Josh talk about this if you watch his channel as well. The fact that I've been using the propionate, that faster acting ester, that one that you see the effects of quicker. Like today, I feel quite full now. Like I feel like my skin's a bit tighter. I feel like things are starting to move. I feel a bit leaner. And performance this week has really bumped up in terms of training. So that's awesome. Please don't use any of this as a guide. This is all obviously very, very specific to my situation, my history, my goals. You should not use this as a guide for yourself or any type of guide. Please just watch it for education and hopefully some entertainment. Obviously, go speak to your doctor if you're going to look to do any of this, because I'm not a medical professional. Sorry for the disclaimer. But that is it. So we'll leave it there. As you can see, I need to go to the gym. Hopefully that was enjoyable. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.